So welcome this morning to this very kind of broad brush session, how to engage yourself and children with climate change. This is really a sort of very quick overview. It's going to be 45 minutes long. Just thinking about all the different psychological considerations for supporting children to think about climate change and to think about their futures and their feelings around climate change. Really, if you're already here at this session, you are engaged on the topic, so well done. I hope that today, in a sense, is more about some things to think about that might fine-tune your engagement with climate, how to feel a bit less anxious, or how to be a bit more aware about the things that might be holding ourselves or other people back from engaging in the topic. So, as I said, my name's Dr Louise Edgington. I'm an educational psychologist here in Kensington, Chelsea, and also Westminster. I also do a bit of tutoring at UCL and a bit of consultancy work for the group Climate Psychologists. And prior to that, I did physics at Oxford, where we looked at a lot of the sort of climate science and the science of renewable energy, internship at Bloomberg New Energy Finance, and I was a science teacher. So all of that to say, I've kind of been thinking about the topic for a while. That does not mean, though, that I am an expert. So please, if anyone would love to contribute to the discussion or to share their own thoughts, or if I've got anything wrong, please do just pop it in the chat and contribute to the discussion. This is a webinar, so it's going to be less interactive than a workshop, I suppose, purely because of the amount of information we have to get through, but I would love it if people wish to contribute via the chat. It will be recorded and we can get in touch with you later if you're interested. So before we start to think about how to support children, adults or anybody, teachers, anyone supporting young people, need to spend a bit of time and attention on themselves. So this is the getting yourself in shape part that we're going to look at first. I'm going to just brush over some of the psychological considerations when we think about our own engagement in the topic. So getting the facts, understanding the status of climate change and how it makes us feel. We're going to look at the balance between ignoring or denial versus feeling overwhelmed, and also ways to look after yourself and to make sure we are feeling balanced and available to be helpful. Next, then, we're going to look at ways to support children and young people, some things to be thinking about or holding in mind. So consideration of anger and eco-anxiety, some tips really on how to have the conversation and how to talk to children about climate change. And then finishing up on some more sort of broad educational considerations, some almost like values-based or just things to bear in mind as we move into a future that's going to look quite different to perhaps what we may have envisaged. So as I said, it's a very broad-ranging and complicated topic. So if anyone, if some difficult feelings do come up for anyone, or if you disagree with me strongly, as I said, please do share in the chat. That symbol there of the exclamation mark is hopefully going to just give you a little heads up for those moments. Similarly, the question mark, I'll be inviting you guys to just take a moment to reflect on your own engagement and responses around the things I'm talking about, your own beliefs and attitudes. So please, again, feel free to share it in the chat when you see those symbols. Okay, so diving straight in then to a look at some of the reasons why humankind has been kind of slow to engage with this topic. Okay, uncertainty, mistrust and sunk costs can easily lead to active denial of the problem. There's a lot of resistance out there to making a lot of sustainable changes or even thinking about what's really going on. And as adults, I think we owe it to children to be able to look at these things and understand what our psychology is doing to us and why it is perhaps holding us back a little bit. So the first way that can happen is around getting the facts, actually understanding the science of climate change. Now, nobody, not even the climate scientists, understand it all, right? It's such a hyper object, a broad topic, that no one area of science is going to cover it. So we have to get our information from a source, right? We have to sort of read the news or read information from somewhere or take it in from somewhere. But even at that very first step, our psychology can catch us out, okay? And the first way that happens is that cognitive biases might affect what we choose to read. When we're scrolling through our social media feeds or even picking up an old-fashioned paper, we don't read everything from cover to cover. Our cognitive biases are going to draw our attention in a particular direction. And here are some of the ways it can do this. One is Daniel Gilbert's pain theory. If something is personal, abrupt, immoral, or happening right now, it gets our attention more. So often things like terrorism or sort of some immoral sex scandal might, it just might be more interesting and appealing and get our attention more than the more significant report of 400 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. Other things that we're drawn to can tend to be things that actually are quite hopeful and feel good and comforting, or things that confirm what we already believe. This confirmation bias, that's a big one. We love it. It's less mental energy for us to not have to change our minds, to find things that confirm what we know. And that can lead to this echo chamber phenomenon down here, where we tend to just be very reluctant to engage in other opinions. So these biases also affect the news on offer. Depending on what sort of website or news source you go to, we're not given a objective presentation of all the events across the world. They are also, the news media outlets are very much driven by getting people's eyeballs and attention. And especially on social media, where there's less overview or regulation of what's on offer, then we get into the zone of things like fake news. And that can very much lead to this echo chamber phenomenon, when you have the algorithm constantly serving you up things that confirm what you already know, even if it's not really true. Conspiracy theories is another thing to be bearing in mind, that they can often garner attention because they provide a simple solution to quite a complex situation. But again, they're not always true. So just being aware of these notions, and just as an adult, it can be helpful to just constantly be questioning and being a bit critical of things that we engage with, rather than taking everything at face value. This is important for us, but also for us to be teaching these skills to children, really. So just take a moment now and think, what information and news sources do you trust? I'm not here to tell you what that should be. If you want to, share it in the chat. These are mine. And I say these are mine, I'm not wedded to them. When I read stuff, I'm constantly, or I try to constantly just question, does this sound right? Have they fact checked that? Who's writing it? Where's it coming from? So I like to include a slide on some suggestions here, just in case children or parents are doing that thing where they get their news purely from social media. it is, people are tending to spend less time on reputable news sources, and we are at risk of losing something there, losing truth and science. I've put the IPCC in red, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. That's probably the best source of scientific information that we have on what's happening around climate. So do check it out if you haven't already. It's quite accessible, actually. Okay. So once, as an adult, you've done the brave work of trying to get educated or clued up on what's actually going on around climate change, you might find yourself faced with some sort of scary headlines. Children's futures are going to be harder. That is a scary fact that is, when you first encounter it and the truth of it truly sinks in, it can be quite alarming and disconcerting. And it's important at this stage to more than acknowledge the notion of climate justice, that the impacts of all these climate effects are going to be disproportionate and unfairly distributed across the globe. And as usual, it's the people with fewer access to resources, fewer resources who are going to be most impacted. And there is a real social injustice occurring around that. So just reading these headlines, again, in this self-check activity, I'd like to invite you to take a moment and pause and just think, how does reading these headlines, which were from a couple of weeks ago, I think from The Guardian, what emotions does this provoke in you? Hearing me talk about children's futures being harder, how does that make you feel? Because it's that discomfort feeling that arises within us. It's that we need to learn to be with and sit with, because otherwise we're just going to push it away. We're going to pick up our phone and distract ourselves. We're going to tell ourselves, oh, it won't happen to me, I'm fine. Our brains work to protect ourselves from that difficult feeling. But if you take nothing else away from today, it would be that the more of us that can learn to actually sit with that discomfort, move through it, feel it, and use it to drive positive action, the better, because it's the people that cannot tolerate that discomfort that wind up doing unhelpful things out of fear. So this is what we're aiming for. We're actually, the psychology part here of facing up to climate change is all about this balance, as I see it. We want to feel balance between this state of having our head in the sand versus feeling totally overwhelmed. So, and to be honest, that's the best place for action to take place. When we've got head in the sands and in denial, that's no good. Carrying on as normal. And if we're totally overwhelmed, that can inhibit our ability to actually engage and take action, or to feel good even. We want to be in this balance zone. So again, please take a moment now and have a think. Whereabouts might you be on this scale between ignoring and overwhelm? Where are you in general, or where are you today as I'm talking even? Just have a little number and either say it in your head or pop it in the chat. Okay. Depending on where you're placing yourself, the work that one might like to do is going to be either to bring yourself out of denial or to calm yourself down if you're feeling more overwhelmed. So we're going to look at each of those in turn, some little suggestions for how to do that. Let's look at the denial head in sand state first. So it's a very natural and human response when we're faced with a threat to or a scared feeling, to try and make that threat go away. And we have these cognitive biases and psychological barriers that enable us to do that. Here are some of my favourites. We've got the bystander effect, or the diffusion of responsibility. This notion that someone else will sort it. Paris Agreement 2015, yeah, that'll be fine. Governments will sort it. Not my problem. That is a form of cognitive bias that prevents us from engaging in the problem. Techno-salvation. Thinking AI will fix the problem. Artificial intelligence, for sure, has some excellent use cases, and I'm really hopeful about the ways in which you can bring about greater efficiencies in the climate space. Is it a silver bullet that will fix everything on its own? No, we need to be engaged as well. We need people in the right mindset to want to adopt this kind of technology. Social comparison effect. When you see everyone else around you doing unsustainable behaviours, it's very easy just to be like, oh, I'll just do that too, or to blame other people as well. It's China that needs to reduce its emissions. I've heard that one a couple of times. It's a way of, again, passing off responsibility so we don't have to think about it. If you'd like to look into this more, I invite you to check out The New Scientist. Has a very comprehensive collection of cognitive biases, and it's based upon Gifford's dragons, he calls them, Daniel Gifford's collection of psychological things that hold us back. And of course, the sunk cost fallacy. Now that is, for some people, a very real barrier. If we've invested money in something, it's hard to let that go. Okay. So, yeah. If you need to pull your head out the sand, there are little things to be watching out for that can help you do that. But I suspect the people who are here might need more of this, might need more of the looking after yourself and self-care aspect of things. And I know that I do. I have every few weeks I might have a flare-up of climate anxiety. And then I come back to these tips that I'm about to share with you to just kind of bring myself back to that balanced state. First one, limit news. You can't take it all on. I literally do limit myself, and I might check the news once a day and leave it at that. I don't go into these deep dives. Another thing I do is subscribe to more positive news feeds like Cypher, Nexus, Daily Climate, that celebrate the progress and all the good things that actually are happening. It's really important to be balanced in our news consumption, and it also just makes you feel a bit better as well. Breathe, sitting with the feelings. This one is surprisingly hard to do. And yet, if you can develop a practice, and meditation really helps with this, of allowing that difficult feeling to be there rather than trying to push it away, your behaviours won't be driven by the fear of that feeling. You'll know, I can cope with that scary feeling. I'm actually safe in the moment. It's just a feeling. It will come and go. It will come again. It will go again. Healthy enjoyment. A lot of the activist community are thinking about this. It's okay to enjoy your life and have a good time and appreciate nature. And connecting with others in community. Seeking out climate aware people or colleagues can be really lovely to just share your feelings. Climate Psychology Alliance run a lovely climate circle online where it's a safe space to talk about feelings. And in our service too, we're developing a similar space for teachers to talk about their concerns around climate. Innovating. So actually doing something not only helps the climate situation, but it helps you feel better as well, actually. So just trying to do one little thing each day for yourself to reduce your own carbon footprint, just shaving off what you can here and there just kind of helps build that momentum and other people see it. Activating others can be a bit more tricky because you don't want to come across as judgmental. That doesn't work. But there's always a petition you can sign, an MP you can write to, or just a little conversation that you can have with a friend. Sometimes that actually goes a really long way. So more self-care tips. Watching out for fatalism and the myth of self-interest. If you ever catch yourself having that sort of doom type fatalistic thought, just catch it and look at it, because it's not actually the truth. It hasn't happened. We don't know it's going to happen. And just because you have that thought, it doesn't make it true. In fact, going around believing those thoughts can be more likely to make it true if you believe that's going to happen and then you act accordingly. It's not helpful and it doesn't make you feel great at all. There's another psychological phenomenon called the myth of self-interest, where it's been shown in the late 90s that we as humans tend to actually overestimate selfish behaviour in others. So things might not be as bad as we think, actually. We are, as a population, although our society is perhaps structured in a capitalistic fashion to benefit one's own self-interest, it's been shown that we do look out for each other more than it seems when it really comes down to it. Just look at how people responded in the COVID pandemic. That was quite inspiring. Attitude watch. Again, watching out if in case you ever have this notion that you have to save the world, or you're putting all your hope into governments to do the right thing, for example. Societal change on the scale required is going to occur as a collective, and each one of us is just a part and a piece of this. We are not individually responsible for the whole. We're responsible for ourselves. That is it. And through taking responsibility for ourselves, that's going to influence other people. So we don't need perfect eco behaviour from everybody. We need everybody doing what they can. So not giving yourself too much of a hard time, I think, is really important. And finally, believing in the power of social comparison. In order for societal change to occur, you really only need 25% of the population moving in a particular direction for things to change. And there are plenty of encouraging examples of societal change in the past, such as the civil rights movement, the ozone layer shrinking, smoking ban, suffragette movement. It can happen, and it might feel at first as if nothing's happening until you reach that tipping point in the transition phase, and then things really start to change. And I think we're on the edge of it now, to be honest. Okay. Rattling through our agenda, this is really scratching the surface about the whole, well, a wide range of how psychology is relevant here. So I've rattled through the getting yourself in shape, just touching upon some of the psychological considerations around this topic. And now we're going to move into things to think about when we're supporting children and young people. All of the above, all of what we've talked about so far, is relevant to children and young people. So in a sense, first you apply it to yourself, and from that position of balance, hopefully, then you can be in a better place to be supporting the children around you. Down here, this oxygen mask notion is super important. On a plane, if there's a problem, you'll be told to put your oxygen mask on yourself before supporting somebody else. And that is absolutely the case here. We cannot contain a child's difficult feelings and anxieties unless we ourselves are psychologically aware and balanced and able to self-regulate and be honest with ourselves about our own defences. So yeah, with children, all of what we've talked about before still applies. You can have conversations with them about being discerning about where they get their news sources from. You can have conversations with children about who's responsible for climate change behaviours and change. And you might also find yourself in a moment with a child who is perhaps having a moment of overwhelm. And all I would say is, you know, if that does happen, treating it like any other sort of anxiety or panic attack state, it's okay to get grounded in the moment. And there are so many things that can be done to support children. Breathing techniques, muscle relaxation. I personally love this 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding activity. Just bringing you into the present moment sometimes can be helpful. My hope, though, is that we won't be seeing too many children who are reaching this acute panic flare-up of facing it if they are supported by adults who have done this kind of work themselves. Having eco-anxiety or having difficult feelings around climate change is a very normal response. So if and when we're supporting children around these difficult feelings, really that's the key message that can also reduce the sense of overwhelm is, you know, they're not crazy, they're having a very normal response to a highly uncertain situation. And it's understandable they feel the way that they do. It means that they care. Normalizing anxiety. We also need to normalize anger. We're seeing this increasingly, actually. There is a growing and totally understandable sense amongst the younger generation that the older generation have left them a mess. Messages like, oh, the younger generation, you can fix it. That is not helpful. That puts the responsibility onto children when clearly they did not create this mess. Okay, it is, people might object to this, but many people over 40, and I am 40 myself, we benefited from the relative economic growth, you know, afforded by fossil fuels. Not everybody, obviously, I'm talking on average, but we've definitely, as a whole, been using up the climate's resources and leaving quite a mess for children to inherit. Wonderful book by John Lanchester here, The Wall, deals with this topic very well. He really explains about this intergenerational rift. And not only is that unpleasant for children, I actually think it's quite dangerous if there's going to be further division within society. We need to listen to children, take responsibility for our part in it, and allow them to express their anger. And keep that attachment relationship intact so that we can support them and essentially stay united, you know, as we deal with these difficult things arising. So that's a little bit about feelings, but sometimes teachers in particular can be quite concerned about how to have conversations with children about climate change, how to broach a topic that seems so huge, so overwhelming, and a bit of a minefield, perhaps. Here are some thoughts. Some of these are from the Climate Psychology Alliance and some from the climate psychologists. So we have a responsibility to tell children the truth, not to give them false hope. It is absolutely not, in my opinion, the right thing to do to be like, oh, it'll be fine. To tell a child, don't worry, I'll be fine, and to talk as if there isn't a problem to be faced is not true or fair to them at all. And there's this lovely analogy that Caroline Hickman from the Climate Psychology Alliance uses about just enough grit to grow. Think of a tree. If it doesn't have enough grit in the soil, its roots will rot. If it doesn't have enough breeze in the air, its roots won't grow deep enough and it just falls over. There needs to be exposure to the actual adversity in the world if they are to develop resilience to grow around it. So we do need to be telling the truth in bite-sized chunks in an age-appropriate fashion. And obviously considering any special needs that or attachments or trauma that your children in your care may have. If anyone has any closer questions around that, please do feel free to contact me. By the way, I'd be more than happy to more than happy to troubleshoot any particular situations arising around that. So, as I said, we absolutely have a responsibility to tell the truth. We want to avoid this situation of vicarious avoidance. Sometimes I see families who maybe don't talk about a parent's upcoming death because they don't want to upset the child, and then the child doesn't talk about it because they don't want to upset the parent. And before we know it, it's like a taboo subject we can't go near. So absolutely inviting the conversation, not pushing it, inviting it. You might like to try a little question box that children can post something into if they wish. Bear in mind that children, especially young ones, will come at you at the most random of times and ask you a massive existential question, you know, maybe just when you're leaving the house and you're late for an appointment. Try to go with it where you can, but if not, reassure them that you'll come back to that topic and do make time for it on another occasion. And be honest if you don't know the answer. You probably don't, because there's a lot to learn, there's a lot to consider. But there's a real opportunity there to engage in a fact-finding mission together, which can be as valuable, if not more valuable, actually. You're showing them how to find out and how to do that critical information weighing up process. And finally, anytime you're talking about something difficult, you do also want to be focusing on what actions can be taken and what is happening. So balancing it, the difficult stuff out with a sense of empowerment, action and agency, and really trying to instill that in yourselves and the children. So there's quite a dense slide, but here I've just put in some very broad suggestions for activities for sort of different age ranges. This is absolutely relevant for schools, but also for parents or any professionals engaging with children at different ages. Just run through it quickly. For the preschoolers and receptions, their world is very much about what they can see and feel and touch, their immediate world. So you want to be having conversations around their daily life, really, you know, walking instead of using the car. Maybe if there's a housing development occurring, you could talk about, you know, why new houses need to be built and the impact on the environment, and make it tangible, I suppose. Children of that age make sense of the world through personification of things or animals. So there's lots of cute stories out there around animals, and, you know, thinking about a polar bear or whatever it is, it sort of prepares them to apply that schema into their own life when they're a little bit older. And obviously getting out and about into nature, talking about it, touching it, enjoying it is really important, because we can't care about something that we're not connected to. But then for primary age children, it's kind of much of the same. We're still using stories, but you can also now bring in some more inspiring case studies, you know, such as this book, Greta and the Giants, it's a lovely story that just the giants. So the giants will be the big corporations and governments, and yeah, there's so much out there. I'm sorry, I don't have I don't even need to give you examples. They're so easy to find nowadays. It's lovely, actually. Just go to your local library and it's replete with lovely books with examples. This one I found the other day, Izzy Gizmo. It's not even ostensibly about climate change, and yet within it there are all these beautiful incidental references where the use of clean energy, recycling and reusing is completely normalized. And actually, I think that messaging is a lot more powerful than the sort of do this, do that message that you do sometimes see. Learning about young activists around the world, particularly if they're representative of the communities of children that you're talking to. And project learning, this can really start to come into its own at primary age. So again, it's encouraging children to have that agency in their own lives, and they might enjoy starting a little project in their own class, in their own home even, or in their own school, thinking about how they can make a difference within their own environment. So for example, you might like to do something lobbying the school canteen, trying to get that to change, or contacting the council, or some sort of campaign about turning off your engines, at school pickup, that kind of thing. By secondary age, those projects are still an excellent way to learn and imbue children with that sense of agency, but you can almost expand the reach of the projects to beyond their school and beyond their home environment. This is where the use of the internet can really come into itself, and you can start doing projects such as raising awareness of greenwashing practices on social media. So greenwashing being the practice of using ostensibly sustainable credentials to help your marketing campaign, but you're not really being green. I won't name any companies. At secondary age, again, depending on the pupil in question, getting involved in protest and petitions can be a really powerful way of raising awareness and learning about systems and society in the meantime. Last point, super important, debate and critical reasoning. Just getting children to think for themselves and maybe research a topic and then have a conversation about it. Rather than being spoon-fed all the time, I think is going to be essential for us to have resilient citizens who can think and make decisions rather than being manipulated by whatever forces that may arise that want to manipulate them. There's also a whole plethora of cool internet resources such as the climate game. It's almost like a Sims, like a simulation for society game where you have to make difficult decisions on how to reduce a society's carbon footprint. Just a slight expansion on the debate and critical reasoning point on the previous slide. This, especially given the seeming explosion of AI technologies out there, this is going to be more important than ever. Having children who not only are able to consider the validity of news and information that they're seeing, but then they're able to weigh up information and make an informed decision for themselves. There is a huge risk of AI serving up all sorts of misinformation online. And the risk there is, that it's going to engender fear and division and not help us work together to address the climate challenge in the right way. Frightened public accepts abridgments of civil liberties that are otherwise hard to justify. So my hope really is that those of us who are supporting children can address this. We can try and be there to help children regulate through their fears so that they're not impeded by scary feelings, but they can manage them and move through that. And that they can move through this quagmire of information and actually think clearly in order that we can make the right or make collective decisions that are in our best interests going forward. We're approaching time, so I'll just run through these final suggestions really for general resilience. Our lifestyles are going to have to change, and so I'm a mother of 2 young children, and I don't want them to suddenly feel bereft that they can't go on annual holidays to the Caribbean. So, you know, we don't fly. And I'm modelling those lifestyle behaviours just so that they don't feel a sense of loss if and when things really do change. Similarly, I'm having lots of conversations with them about want versus need. You know, do you really need that Paw Patrol tower? No. Do you want it? Sure. But is it going to make you happy? Maybe for 5 minutes. Conversations about what life's for and what's important. And similarly, I get them out in nature as much as I can. Career aspirations. This is an interesting one. Our education system, and certainly how I was brought up, constantly being asked, what are you going to do when you grow up? I think we need to get rid of the idea of a career. It's limiting and it's not relevant anymore. We need young children to be flexible and adaptable and imbued with skills that help them respond to whatever's happening. Again, it's the interaction of AI and climate that is just going to create this uncertain future. That there's going to be many opportunities, but we can't just assume they're going to have a career for life or what that's going to be anymore. So it's focusing on new developments, learning new skills, creativity, critical thinking, and especially caring for others. That is, not only is it a human skill that arguably AI doesn't have, it's going to be essential if if humanity is going to pull through this all together. This every person for themselves mentality is perhaps what's got us into this mess in the first place. So we do need a radical shift, in my opinion, about how we think of getting ahead, what that really means, what do we value. Staying humble. So again, as parents, things are moving so fast now, or teachers even, we don't necessarily know the latest or know all the answers or even know what's best. We need to have that humility to recognise that, you know, we're all learning and adapting together. And that's going to help that staying in relationship aspect that I was talking about earlier. And then finally, the tolerance of uncertainty. In society, we tend to plan and schedule and have insurance for everything, and we like to know what's going to happen at all times, but life actually isn't like that. Life is inherently uncertain, and it's only going to become even more so going forward. So the sooner we can be okay with that and practice being okay with that, the more children are going to pick up on that tolerance of uncertainty. And there's a link here to some lovely ideas about how to do that from Anxiety Canada. Okay, just a couple of minutes over then. I will thank you for your time today. It's been a lot of information give, but please do contact me after. It should be a capital L at the beginning there, louise.edgington@rbkc.gov.uk if you'd like to know any more. Otherwise, yeah, please do write any targets or any thoughts that this may have thrown up for you about what you could do for yourself, for the children in your care, or more generally over the coming weeks and years.